Hey everyone, welcome to Neighbor Science, the only podcast about political economy and anime. I'm Ryan Salisbury.
I'm Chris Nivens.
And today we are talking about something old.
Very.
As our new favorite podcast, Goth Angel Sinners, say, we are talking about history today, but we're not a history podcast.
That's right. We're not a history podcast.
So Marx and Marxists are never far from mentioning the means of production, which they insist is the basis of capitalism and any system of statecraft, really.
And they're to be forgiven for that, considering the material conditions of the time in which the theory was created.
Yeah, it's cool. They're reading a 150-year-old book. It's fine.
You know, I like fan fiction and fan fiction too.
We can't all have perfect opinions. I do,
right.
but
but that's why he brought me on, because I have
other people are mortal.
Imperfect opinions.
So, so today we're talking about one of the world's first. I don't know if it's
thalassocracies
or thalassocracies. Now I'm doubting it.
Just say thalassocracy.
Yeah, okay. So one of the world's first thalassocracies, a word that you've probably never heard of. I haven't.
Yeah, but it's badass and you should use it
last
more.
Month.
Yeah,
it's basically a sea empire. And it's Phoenicia, and we're talking about how early states depended on control of distribution as much or more than they depend on control of production. So one important thing to note before we even start is that Phoenicia was around for 2,036 years, if longer, I guess, if you count when they were vassals to other states. But but because they kept records on papyrus, relatively little is known about it. But basically, they've existed for way longer than our civilization.
Oh yeah, they're fascinating in so many ways. The longevity of their society was interesting, and we'll get into kind of like what part of what enabled that. In terms of their organization, but basically they were a very kind of articulate and pragmatic kind of society that was more or less decentralized as a whole society, but extremely centralized locally. Anyway, and then you said that they kept records on papyrus, and that's why we know relatively little. And my intuition is that because papyrus rots so easily.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that was one of the issues with like Egyptian history as well. Is that most of what we know is from stone and clay.
Yeah. So we basically have almost no records on them. So they could have kept completely like extensive records.
Yeah. That's why the papyrus font is so shitty.
Yeah, you write something down in
garbage
papyrus font and then it rots like 10 minutes
goes
later.
Away.
Yeah. And that's actually something I worry about our civilization too. Like, if humans survive climate change, which in my mind is debatable whether or not we will.
We won't. That's the answer.
Future civilizations, if they exist, are going to have a real hard time studying us because everything's going to be on, mostly on hard drives.
Exactly.
Which, I mean, any electronic storage medium except for tape only lasts like 10 years at most. And then you need specific technologies to be able to read it.
Yep.
You need to understand what format it's in.
Yep.
It's way harder than paper records, which, like, all you got to do is translate the language.
Just look at it.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
Oh, this marking on this surface, I can kind of figure out maybe what it symbolized. There's a kind of a common cognitive pattern there.
Right.
But like
so
you said,
even if English survives, it's still going to be a huge pain in the ass to try and read any of our knowledge because it's all going to be electronic and
got to run the hard drive and then you got to run something that interprets.
Got to have a computer,
got to have a display, and then you have to have.
Which without oil, I wonder if computers will even be possible anymore. I don't know.
Interesting podcast episode idea. Well, interesting to me.
I don't know if we can make a whole episode about something as speculative as that. I don't know.
First, we have to see what this Elon Musk lawsuit comes out to, and then we can talk about oil and electronics and shit.
First, we have to see if who's going to be on SCOTUS and if we're all going to die
basically.
Because conservatives decide it's legal to grind poor people into paste or whatever.
Right, exactly. I, for one, look forward to...
I think it should be legal to grind poor people into paste, but you should have to pay a steep fee to the government for it.
like kind of like a carbon tax, but it's like a poverty bone meal tax.
It's going to be like executive powder from Futurama, except the opposite of that.
Exactly.
Okay, so you seem to know way more about Phoenicia than me, so I'm going to let you drive a little more.
Right. Okay. All right. So I'm a bit of an ancient history amateur armchair kind of geek. I'm one of those people who, like, I was smarter as a kid, honestly, and now I'm...
Everyone was smarter as a kid.
Yeah,
and then you just get... you peak at, like, 14
nobody
years
hold
old,
you
and then you just
accountable.
get stupid as shit.
Right, exactly. And I'm stupid as shit, man.
You learn how to do
dumb.
one specific thing that the government or business wants you to do, and then that's what you do for the rest of your life, and then everything else you're stupid at.
Exactly, yeah. And
that's why we're doing this podcast.
Right. In my case, the thing I'm allowed to do is being underemployed and broke as fuck. Like many of you, but you know.
I'm really good.
But I know more about the fucking Phoenicians, so shut the fuck up.
I'm really good at updating extremely old computerized survey systems, which will obviously be a skill that will be very useful after the U.S. empire collapses.
Yes.
I'm not worried at all.
Once we're out of oil and we can't even access our databases. All right. So
I should just learn ninjutsu or something.
Yeah, well, ninjutsu is perennially useful. Because okay. So I just kind of had like a sort of a brief sort of list style write up, and I'm just going to go through it.
Okay.
So the Phoenicians were a Semitic people. There are some theories about the relation of, like the ethnic relations of like the ancient Hebrews, who we all know and love, to say like the Canaanites, who they love to hate, and the Phoenicians, who are arguably also the Philistines or the Hyksos if you're into archaeology and whatnot.
And possibly ancient Japan.
Right.
Where
according to this theory that Ryan dug up.
And so now our solution, we do have a one-state solution to Israel, but the one state is Japan.
It involves Japan.
We're going to move Israel to Japan.
Right.
That's our new plan.
Japanese imperialism revived by way of... Mossad?
They're just more compatible. Japanese people just love racism, and so we're just gonna put all the Israelis there because they'll just get along.
That's right. Israelizing,
or maybe they won't. I don't know. One of those two.
We'll just call it Israelizing Japan. It'll put hair on your chest. Okay. So the Phoenicians were a Semitic people. I think they were North Semitic, based on our notes here. They were called Canaanites by like the Greeks and whatnot, which was a reference to this purple dye.
James Caan.
James Caan. Yeah. Yes. James Caan. Yeah. But they all look like James Caan. This is a reference, just like the name Phoenicians or Punic. These were all words that referred to the purple dye that they kind of made their early bank on.
Yeah,
made their early money on.
It's called phthalo blue.
Yeah,
you might know it from Bob Ross's show.
Yeah, how's it spelled again? Like
P-H-T-H-A-L-O.
Yeah, fucking Greeks, man. and so they called it phthalo blue.
No, for real though, it's Tyrian purple.
Cocksucking blue.
That's what it's actually.
Yeah, but it's purple because they couldn't make it easy on us.
Pretty much the same color.
Yeah. Humans are shit, man.
Yeah.
So they had this dye that they made from these murex mollusks, right?
Yeah, if you're listening, look up murex, M-U-R-E-X. It looks fucking metal.
It looks metal as fuck. Like I'm pretty sure the shell is actually the name of the band if you look at it visually.
Like if you got two of those shells and put it on the shoulders of a leather jacket, you look like the most badass motherfucker alive.
People will actually pay you to come into their bar. Yeah, so
they would assume that you own the local water source.
right, exactly, right. Mediocre. So the Phoenicians were also called Canaanites, which is again, so they're really entangled in this Old Testament / Torah literature. Partly because the Hebrews are ostensibly their relatives and they fought over the same lands and coastline, but we're not going to get into that. We're going to get more into the Phoenicians as attested by a lot of the different common sources from like the Greeks, the Persians, etc. So that we can get into like how their society actually worked versus like what the Hebrews liked and disliked about them, because that's kind of more of a religious thing. Anyway, so their motherland seems to have been the Levant, kind of obviously based on what we've said so far. And that's where they founded their oldest cities, like Tyre, Sidon.
And for those who are kind of stupid like me, where is the Levant?
Sorry, so the Levant is, if you look at...
it's basically Iraq and Syria, right?
Yeah, well, so Iraq is actually Mesopotamia.
Okay.
Right. So the Levant is more like, if you take like the southern, like the very southern border of Turkey and Syria and like the land of Syria, all the way down that strip along the coast, down to like the Sinai region, right? That's basically the Levant, and this is general terms. I'm not a Middle East scholar or anything, and I'm sure that my friends from grad school would fucking rake me over the coals for being so imprecise, because well, fuck them, But yeah, the Levant is that like that strip of coastland, also kind of backed by mountains and some lakes and rivers.
Okay.
Where you had a pretty good front onto the Mediterranean from the east, as well as access to some arable land that could support you there. And so it was highly contested between like the lands, like the city-states and whatnot of Mesopotamia, the Egyptian civilizations and dynasties, the Assyrians, the Assyrians and whatnot, the Anatolian civilizations such as like the Hittites and stuff, and eventually the Persians as they kind of took over that area.
It's crazy the more you learn about this stuff, like the more you realize, like the ancient world seems really empty if you don't know much about it.
Yeah, oh my god!
And then the more you learn about it, you're like, wow, there's so much shit going on.
I mainline that shit every day. I can't stop. But yeah, so the Levant is that kind of like strip of coastland, and like it's insane. It has never stopped being relevant ever since any human did anything. The Levant has been important, and that is one of the kind of ducking back in and then back out of like Western religion and like Judaism and Islam and stuff. That is one of the kind of continuing like confirmation biases of the Abrahamic religions, is that they come out of that area, and they're based on an idea that that area is sacred. Well, I don't personally think it's sacred, but I do think that it is perennially important to human politics because of its history and its entanglement in historical developments, as well as its strategic location. It's all interrelated. So the Phoenicians came from there, lucky bastards, right? And they're like, well, what if we just found these city-states and shit, What if we make these ships, And the idea was that their early efforts were...
Are we going to make them sound like mobsters now whenever we're talking?
Well, they're basically mobsters. I mean, we'll get into that, right? I mean, you've read the material. But they apparently their early efforts were probably just like a bunch of rafts that they kind of floated along the coast. But I got that off of like a crusty old GeoCities style site, so who knows?
That is, from what I understand, how really early ancient states worked. They would forcibly relocate people to like woodcutting camps.
Yeah, they basically were all about like forced labor and relocation.
Yeah, and they would just like they started off by just cutting. They would cut down trees and just float the logs down the river into the alluvium where the actual state was. Yeah, and that's where they would get all their raw materials.
Yeah, so basically, Canadian culture is based on like primitive Stone Age society. All right. So let's see. So the Phoenician world overall, since we're kind of just introducing this whole thing to you guys, the Phoenician world spanned and in some ways drove and embodied the transitions from the Bronze Age into the Iron Age.
They kind of started at the tail end of the Bronze Age.
Yeah. Like things had been rolling for a while, And
again, if you don't know, because I don't want to assume that anyone knows anything that we're talking about necessarily.
Right.
The Bronze Age and Iron Age were pretty literal. It's civilizations were defined by the primary structural metal that they used.
Yeah, exactly.
In the Bronze Age was bronze, and in the Iron Age was iron.
Exactly.
Pretty easy to remember.
Yeah, and the so like Stone Age went into Bronze Age, went into Iron Age in the classic sort of classical model, and like Ryan said, like the sort of standard structural metal. You go from stone, which is not really metal, but it's what they had. It was the firmest thing they could use, the most durable thing. and it went into bronze because they discovered, oh my god, we can make this fucking shit.
Yeah.
And then it went to iron because somebody figured out, because iron, isn't it the iron is really brittle, hard to work with in its raw form, its ore form. But then they figured out, oh, if we like superheat it to these, then we can fucking melt it all the way down and then start to really pound it out.
Yeah, I think one of the other things you can do is forge it.
Yeah,
and that makes it harder.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You forge.
And
that
I'm sure that when we're all dead, they're going to call this age the Steel Age.
Yeah. Yeah, instead of like the fucking communications age or something, fucking stupid like that.
Or the aluminum age.
Yeah. I mean, we're drinking out of aluminum cans right now.
Yeah, that's true.
Trigger warning. So
drinking DC Brow, check it out.
Yeah, DC Brow, the public ale, pale ale.
Yeah.
It's not bad. I like it.
We also got slightly delayed, so I've also had a can of sake and half a 20-ounce of kratom tea. So.
Yeah, and I had a few rounds.
Doing pretty good right now.
Yeah, had a few rounds at one of my favorite local bars. So the Phoenician world spanning in some ways Bronze Age into the Iron Age, but at the same time as kind of pushing things forward into the Iron Age through their kind of methods, their innovations, their forms of organization. They also provided a kind of continuity between the two ages for everyone because of the longevity of their presence and their influence and their kind of necessity to these civilizational systems in the Mediterranean area. And that's not just the ocean, that's like pretty much everything that you can access inland from the coasts in any given region because of their influence. Anyway, we saw through our research that the expansions of Phoenician trade throughout these ages basically led to financial and operational innovations.
Yeah, I tried to look up some of this stuff. I didn't have much luck. I've been really busy this week with work, so I didn't get to do as much work as I would have liked on this episode. But some early studies, and when I say early, I mean like from the 1920s and 40s.
That was still the Iron Age, as we know. Yeah.
They speculated, that's the word I was trying to think of earlier.
Yep.
They speculated that the Phoenicians developed early... You can just put the mic down. It's fine.
Go ahead.
Phoenicians developed early bills of exchange, I think is what they're called. It's a type of negotiable instrument, is the financial term. And basically what it is a check. So it's a piece of paper that you write an amount on that you're going to pay to a third party, and a second party pays on the third party on your behalf.
Right.
So there was speculation that Phoenicians developed this, which would make sense because if they're trading on the sea, then that would allow them to go into a city and then like take an order from someone and say like, I'll pay you X amount of phthalo blue on this date or whatever, and then the next time the Phoenicians come through, then they would have the thing for them.
Right. Phthalo blue, also known as phallic purple. And that makes sense. I mean, we see this in a lot of operational logic. Again, to this day, like the Phoenicians really mastered, codified a lot of this kind of stuff early on for their purposes. But it's the kind of logic that we see, like, Ryan, you work with code, and we were kind of joking earlier about like inefficiencies in code, like, like tell us like maybe like, I don't know, a simplified kind of bastardized version of what you were frustrated with.
Which thing?
Well, you rewrote a system, right?
Yeah, I'm working on this 10-year-old. Well, 10-plus-year-old system. We haven't worked on it personally in 10 years, so it's more than 10 years old. And I am writing an Excel report, and the person who wrote it basically, like, their code was like a college freshman's like code project,
right?
And I basically rewrote the entire thing,
right?
And I would say I cut out like 70% of the code that they wrote,
right. So that's kind of what you see. I think the Phoenicians doing here is that. Because they were interested in, as merchants throughout time and space, have been interested in maximizing their margins, more or less, at least ensuring their margins. The Phoenicians also wanted like a nice kind of like smooth system, and so they had these financial instruments that they came up with, like what was it called again? It was
Bill of Exchange.
Bill of Exchange, right? And so it was this negotiable instrument, and they'd say, okay, I give this to you as an order, and then you hand it to the next person, and we all get our exchange, and we all essentially profit in some way or another.
Okay. So you're saying that basically all of their software was imperative before.
Right.
And then some smart guy came along and decided, well, that's dumb. You should make it more like declarative and functional and object-oriented and use some programming patterns.
Yeah.
And so they got on there and they rewrote all their C# code and
streamlined it,
just ran better and was more easily maintainable.
Can handle it exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know they were that advanced.
Yeah, they're super advanced. They're actually ancient aliens, and that's why the Jews are a lizard people conspiracy race. Anyway, so so the among those things, they got to that point, and then things were kind of humming along so nicely for the Phoenicians that, when anybody gets rich, everybody around them starts to have ideas about it, which, I have my own ideas.
They're like, hey, man, this is my son. we be his godfather?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, you come to me on it's the day of my daughter's
the day of my daughter's wedding.
And the Phoenicians were like that to everybody. Yeah. And so they had to come up with, as you might expect, ways to facilitate and guarantee their continued mastery of regional trade. So they developed sort of, I think, coextensively or as a result of their successful trade, they developed these military wings for their societies to kind of defend themselves. And, it's not like, the military was anything new. It was just like they saw how things were. They saw that, like, oh my God, we're bordered by, like, the Hittites, maybe the Assyrians or like the Sumerians, the Egyptians for sure, who like really influenced them a lot. Maybe some other civilizations.
The Horde, the Zerg.
Yeah, the Zerg. Yeah, the Alliance. The Outer Planet Alliance. Yeah.
The Space Marines.
The Federation. And so they understood that there was a security risk to their operations, and so they developed these kind of military wings of their society, these defensive structures and stuff. So
do you know, like, were they more like militias or like standing armies?
I'm not sure, but I think because of the Phoenician obsession with the sea, the reliance on the sea, I would imagine that their navies were more standing navies.
Okay.
Right? Like maybe like as we've seen in a lot of other kind of maritime
powers.
So
more like the British setup.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, like you got kind of your merchant marine types.
Yeah.
That's
your militarized.
We
maybe should have mentioned is that other examples of thalassocracies could be like the British Empire,
the Brits,
the Dutch Empire,
right? And we're going to get into them. Yeah. So I'd imagine that like the Navy at least was probably some kind of standing Navy or like something prepared to fight. And we'll get into like their ship types as well, but I'm not sure about their land forces. Their armies would probably just have been, I want to guess, infantry. Although
based on completely pulling it out of my ass, I would guess they probably just have like city palace guards or something like that.
Yeah. Let me. I'm just gonna do a quick Google because I fucking blanked on this actually. Let's see.
So while he's looking that up, I'll just go over. I have a brief section about Phoenician money.
Oh yeah. So, tell me about
that. The Phoenician state was, because it was a thalassocracy, it was a sea empire. So obviously they can't have like a really coherent state because it's on the sea. So it was more set up like a collection of city-states that were not coherently under a single ruler, but they had a shared interest and a shared identity. So there was no single money for the Phoenician state. So for much of its history, it traded with other states using barter, which I think we've mentioned the barter myth on the podcast before. So I'll just go over that again.
Go for it.
If you haven't read Debt by David Graeber, which I think both of us would highly recommend. I don't know if you've read it. Okay.
I've read parts of it, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, the myth of how money works today is that we started with barter. We traded with barter, and then some smart guy invented money because barter is so inconvenient.
Right.
And then we later invented credit in the 1960s or whatever.
Yeah, right. It's close. It's closely allied to the myth of progress.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in reality, there's no society that was based on barter as a means of daily trade.
Right.
What barter is used for is trade between different populations or different states. So the Phoenicians were trading with other states using barter, which makes historical sense. But each city-state issued their own currency in the form of coins. They were silver coins. Taxes on the peasants in the states, though, were collected in kind. They were collected from their harvest. So I'm not exactly clear on what the coinage would have been used for. Probably taxes from non-peasants. I'm guessing.
What you do is so you create like a large building, right, with like a high ceiling and a low floor. You pour all the coins into that chamber,
and then you
dive into it from a diving board and swim around.
and also you're a duck with a top hat.
You're a fucking
and a waistcoat.
A waistcoat. Yeah. And you go.
You have 3 nephews, and you think they're really ungrateful, entitled little pieces of shit.
Exactly.
But you got to deal with them because they're family,
and you have to train them into the trade principles of fallow blue.
Right. But ever since Trump got elected, you can get away with not having to deal with your piece of shit nephews as much anymore.
Right, exactly.
You have Facebook groups where you can commiserate with your fellow Trump fans that your family hates you and all that stuff. But anyway, so each city-state issued its own currency. So really early on, they were using just raw copper, but later on, silver coins went
just
just
fucking
lumps of copper.
Blobs of copper shit from the hillside.
Yeah, I'm sure they weighed it because copper probably wasn't that valuable. Because here's the problem:
it was soft and usable.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So we have this idea that we used to trade gold coin. Like people used to carry sacks of gold coins around and trade with it.
Yeah, just like 300 kilos of rice in Japan.
Yeah.
Sure, guys, sure.
But I mean, not only do you have to consider that gold was much harder to get back then than it is now.
Oh, yeah.
So it was more valuable,
the fuck?
but also they didn't have very accurate scales back then. So there's no possible way they could have traded with gold coins. That would just be absurd.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider problems like coin clipping and stuff like that. And
In the old days,
metals.
people were
they didn't discover how density works until the 1400s or whatever. So they wouldn't have been able to know if a coin was adulterated. But anyway, so they started off with lumps of raw copper, which probably you could weigh with their technologies. Or just from volume or something like that. But anyway, so later on they used hack silver, or hack silver as it's actually called, a form of money based on cut but unstamped silver that you may know from God of War, which was that was used early on in the region, and then they later went to stamped coins, like the kind that we know of today.
Yeah.
They had U.S. presidents on them. And
all the Phoenician U.S. presidents.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite Phoenician U.S. president?
William Henry Harrison.
Yeah. Because he was so good at sailing, or
because he died.
Because
immediately.
He
became president and then immediately died, which is how the presidency should work.
I think you've won me over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's how elections should work. It's like, hey, congratulations, you're president. And then you get to be president for 6 hours.
Right.
You can do whatever you want in that period, but then you die immediately.
Well, I mean, in that case, we should vote for Joe Biden. No offense to that guy.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at which one would be a good one to go from? Actually, yeah, let's go to like their sort of political organization, because that kind of touches on the military anyway.
Sure.
All right, so Phoenician government was, again, interesting as they kind of organized differently from other empires. I kind of hinted at this before, but let's get into it. The city-states themselves, so Tyre, Sidon, like Palermo, which we're going to kind of mention later. The city-states themselves were autonomous. They didn't take orders from each other generally, and they were essentially independent of one another as a result. Founded independently, run independently, and they rarely, according to the record that we have so far, they rarely made mutual political alliances. So it wasn't like, today, the kind of like global liberal order and like everybody wants to pretend to be friends, right? Which is so different from the tone of even 100 years ago, where everyone wanted to pretend to be enemies.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like New York. They don't take orders from nobody.
Right, exactly, right.
Like, hey, I'm sailing here.
Yeah. Hey, my slaves are rowing here.
I like a slave with huge cans.
Yeah. So the Phoenician city-states were kind of governed by these like absolute hereditary monarchs, which like, at least in, say, like European society later, as we kind of are more familiar with, we would just call like kings, queens, etc. So they had these absolute hereditary monarchs, and those usually dudes. I don't know if there were any queen types at all, female rulers at all.
I definitely didn't see any.
I didn't see any at all. So very patriarchal. Big surprise. And then some kind of council of elders to kind of support them, give them advice, be like, well, I don't know, maybe you should increase the currency peg and blah blah blah.
I think the price of Tyrian blue's too high today. I remember when it used to be only 10 pieces of axe silver.
Exactly. You wouldn't believe the asses on these Nubian girls. Yeah.
They just show too much ankle for me, though.
Which, I mean, granted, it seems like most of the Mediterranean civilizations for the past, up until maybe late antiquity were extremely free with their bodies.
Okay.
People just kind of walked around in skirts and shit. I'm pretty sure everyone ate ass. I'm pretty sure. I mean, look at how the
maybe
mural.
Not the Council of Elders.
Just look at the way those murals looked at each other. Yeah. Those fucking tomb paintings were horny as fuck. Okay, so but under these monarchs and like the Council of Elders and stuff, which is kind of like that executive branch, who had technically absolute power, you had a couple of other kind of ruling classes or like administrative classes. First, the priestly class, and second, in no particular order, the elite merchant class. So we know that the absolutism of the monarchic rule within their city-states kind of prevailed, but their impressively built temples sort of signify the importance of the priests.
And I think the temples probably would have been the centers of finance.
Yeah, there were a lot of notes that we ran across about how the temples really predominated.
Yeah,
and of course
those papers that I saw, I didn't read much of them because they were so old. I didn't really trust that they were accurate.
Right,
but it's interesting
papyrus.
It's interesting to mention anyway that they seem to think that the temples would have been the ones issuing those bills of exchange or being the payer of the bills of exchange.
Interesting.
The drawer, I think, is what it's
right. So it's just like America.
The drawee. I don't know. There's so much fucking financial terminology that
I'm never
gonna learn.
There's a lot of that. Yeah.
We need a finance guy on here.
Yeah, a real finance guy. Yeah. So it seems like the temples kind of centralized a lot of that practice, that financial practice, officiated it. The mythology, which I like to touch on right now, is okay. So the Phoenician mythology stated that the universe was created from two primeval elements: wind and desire. So we kind of have like an interesting dichotomy. The winds of desire. It's like a fucking soap opera. Yeah,
sounds sexy.
Yeah. It's like a telenovela,
Hachi machi, as Brian would say.
Hachi machi. Yeah. But it's interesting because they basically have these two primeval elements, one of which is actually physical, and one of which is essentially emotional or cognitive. And it's pretty fascinating because origin myths in any given culture tend to embody and help to pre-order, if we're going with Nitsan.
Okay.
They help to pre-order the preferred value system of the society, like the regime, if you will. And so they frame the culture that sustains the political economy, that sustains the regime, or like the conservative tradition.
Okay.
Which are
So facts did care about their feelings in Phoenicia.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Facts as such. Right. And you kind of see this with, like, in the U.S. you've got the founder's chic, and it's like, oh, it's like all these bourgeois, like, merchant values, and oh, we wear, like, these cute little fucking coats and breeches and stuff, and dress like
have all these big
natives?
sexy asses.
Yeah. Right. And trot around calling each other sir. But so the elements of win and desire bring us back to the merchant class, which is that next administrative kind of powerful class. Because the merchant class in particular, whether or not they were officiated through the priest class, relied on fair winds and market demand, so desire as well. And that was the linchpin of Phoenician success.
That makes sense. Okay.
Right. Right. So basically,
so it's really not that different from our society.
It's exactly like our society, in terms of who gets what and who cares about what, So Phoenicians were basics. No offense to my exes, but yeah, basically they were like, they kind of recognized, they're like, okay, there's wind and there's desire. We want good winds. We want market demand.
We use candles.
We worship. Yeah, we want scandals. Yeah, and we worship success. We got to have it. We got to have it. This brings us back around to some of the structure of society and how they operated politically, logistically. Is that these city-states, autonomous, independent, not often allying as far as we know, they were responsible kind of for their own destiny. They were bootstrappers. What can I say? If it works, it works.
Yeah.
But because of this modular nature, then the ongoing successes of like one given city-state were seen maybe as a bonus to the other city-states, but not exactly necessary to their successes. But, as you might imagine, this still incentivized them to cooperate among the elites, right? Like, yeah, maybe it wasn't necessary to you, but like, do you want to have a hard life or an easy life, right? Capital always follows the path of least resistance, right? So they might not have explicit alliances, but they would have what I guess in IR terms you would call like tacit cooperation, as opposed to negotiated or imposed cooperation, right?
Okay.
Everybody so just kind of knew the game.
Coerce is obvious, but what's negotiated?
Negotiated is like what you usually hear about in like diplomacy, like trade agreements and stuff, where it's like, oh, we come to the
treaties
table,
and stuff?
treaties and stuff. Now, whether or not there's a power differential is another story, right? It's another question.
Yeah.
Imposed is basically colonial, imperial.
Right. Makes sense.
Right. And then negotiated is like, oh, well, we're not explicitly telling you what to do, but we might, but we might also be peers. It could be a China-U.S. thing, Whereas tacit could also be a China-U.S. thing, or it could be like a New York-L.A. thing. Okay. Right? Like, oh, I don't fuck with you, you don't fuck with me, but we kind of like help each other out, entertainment. We trade some players.
We have this rivalry, but it makes our hip-hop more popular.
Exactly. East Coast, West Coast, Yeah. But ultimately, everybody gets richer.
Yeah.
So they were kind of working on that kind of dynamic.
Speaking of which, I'm going to be calling out grub stakers soon. Wait for that.
All right. So let's see. So these Phoenician states, they kept an eye on each other. This L.A. New York thing, or like this like Chicago thing. Just whatever the fuck. They would likely prefer to see their familiar powers, their familiar rivals do well, because they had a lot of overlapping interests, and especially because they were all integrated into the same more or less stable value chain due to their reliance on trade. So value chains are another thing we're going to get into. Any international relations students or students of similar subjects who might be listening, this kind of dynamic or set of dynamics brings up a lot of important questions about cooperation, agreement, power differentials that you guys should really dig into if you are like looking for an essay topic. But that's just an aside. So, all right, Ryan, you want to take it from Trading Posts or
Trading Posts?
Yes, right there. Yeah, Trading Posts.
Okay. Trading posts sometimes outgrew their original purpose and became colonial city-states, and occasionally graduated further from mere city-states to regional powers in their own right. The most famous example of this being Carthage.
Right. And this complicated that dynamic, right? Yeah. Basically, you got your parents, you got your kids, but then the kids grow up.
Right.
So then the kids start setting the rules.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Didn't mean to put you on the spot there, sorry. I know you know this, but
yeah. Oh yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm the loud one.
Extremely familiar with this stuff. I studied all of the notes before we started. Definitely wasn't fucking around. So I mean, one thing that's important about them, obviously because they were a seafaring civilization, was that they were incredibly good shipbuilders for the time.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So they had fairly unique ships known in Greek as Galois.
I think it's Galloy.
Galloy?
Yeah.
I guess that is the Greek pronunciation.
Yeah, I think it's Galloy.
Known in French as Galois.
Right.
So they were large and tub-shaped with broad bottoms to accommodate large amounts of cargo, i.e. the Phoenicians were ass men.
Which is a good thing to be. Yeah.
You just read the next part because this is your jokes.
Sorry. I wrote in some... It's like Phoenicians were ass men, they wanted as much trunk for their junk as possible, These merchants knew what they were doing. But, yeah, so the Galloway were each fitted with a horse's head at the stern. Kind of like, you look at these like Viking longships, in museums or in books, these kind of reconstructions, and they would have like a dragon's head or like, like a Viking warrior's head on the front. So these Phoenician
dragons symbolizing their raw sexual power and riches.
Right. The fact that that their dicks were on fire.
Yeah.
Because they had so much fucking
because
syphilis.
Dragons are the sexiest animals that exist.
Yeah. Scaly, hard to get around.
Yeah.
Get along with.
Everything you want in a man. Hard.
Right.
Silent,
reflux.
angry, sitting on a pile of gold coins.
Yep.
Everything that a woman could possibly want in just an ideal man.
Sounds to me like a pretty comfortable fuck,
Yeah.
And my suspicion is that they put a horse's head on the ship because they were all addicted to heroin. Mm-hmm. And that's what Phthalo Blue was actually.
I mean, they were mobsters, so there was
right.
People getting high on their own supply and stuff like that.
Right. I mean, Phthalo Blue sounds like a fucking drug.
It does.
Name,
Yeah.
Like,
little do people know you can paint with it, but you can also snort it and boof it. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
dude, it's purple.
Yeah, but they call it blue.
So all right. so back to ships.
Yeah.
Because of their need to defend themselves and occasional incentive to participate in competitive wars between other civilizations.
So I don't think we mentioned this explicitly. We talked about it with the other people in the house before we started recording.
Right, with my roommates.
Yeah, so the whole thing about their civilization was that they cemented their position of power in the Mediterranean and the Levant with trade. Yep. So they were not very militaristic at all.
Right, they were not very militaristic overall, especially early on.
Yeah.
And even later with Carthage, the famous example of Carthage versus Rome. Carthage kind of had to invent militarism for themselves in order to compete with Rome because Rome came at them more or less first. And so, early Phoenicians, they kind of had a military thing. Again, it was mostly like a defense force or like a kind of like a mercenary, like I'll go along with you guys to defend our interests in common, because we're regional friends.
And another thing I didn't think about because we live in basically a secular society. Not really, but kind of. I'm not going to get into that whole tangent. But
that's like several dissertations.
Yeah. We live in a secular society today, so we really think of religion as a source of power. So I don't think they were a very religious society either.
Very pragmatic people.
Yeah.
They had religion. It was tied up in their sort of commercial values, as we kind of discussed with wind.
Yeah, they had temples
and desire,
but they didn't have a church.
Yeah, exactly. Wind and Desire sounds kind of like a cheesy dad rock band, or like a new
or
age,
like a 40s movie.
Or like a 40s movie. Yeah, like a new age sex toy store.
They got like they put those. What is that thing they do in Casablanca where they had like the silk screen in front of the
right.
sexy ladies?
Yeah, like the discretion thing. Like, ooh, what's behind there? You know what the fuck is behind there? It's fine. Don't worry about it. Stop body shaming each other. But yeah, so they developed these warships, and there's these terms that we'll use briefly. Biremes, which is two-banked ships, so they had these ships like the Galley, but they had rows of oars. So the bireme had 2 banks of oars. Triremes had 3 banks of oars. This is how I understand it anyway. And that provided extra propulsion. So it's kind of like, you talk about a V6 versus a V8 engine. And I don't know shit about cars, but I know that much.
One has 8 Vs.
Yeah.
And the other has 6 Vs.
That's volts, right?
Volts. Yes.
6 volts.
Yeah.
For your
you
car.
put 6 volts into the spark plugs and it makes the engine go pretty fast.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But if you put another 2 volts in there, it makes it go really fast.
Right. Exactly.
You don't even
know. And the acronym PIV means person and vehicle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Or something. Yeah. Okay. So all right. So the biremes and triremes, they may or may not have used outriggers, just like any given ship would or wouldn't use outriggers to stabilize. And they could also be built or mounted with front-facing rams, which I believe went just above the waterline of the ship. Mm-hmm. And these rams would help them to essentially drive against, smash into, and sink other ships. Like, it'd be kind of like if you, rather disturbingly, put like a knife on like the fly of your pants and ran into somebody you hated, just like and just like stabbed him that way.
Yeah, it's like bull bars.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
and so they would just like, they had no other way at the time to get close enough to another ship without suffering damage, I think. And so they'd be like, well, we just gotta like ram the fuck out of them from the side. And it's a total power move because it does take that kind of skill with these kinds of ships to get your ship to do that. With these 2 banked, two rows of oars, 3 rows of oars, using one set of oars against the other to kind of turn like a little like water bug, but like, and then pick up the speed once you're in a direction to get that other ship fucked over enough to sink them. So it takes a lot of skill to do that. So if you can do that, you're kind of a badass. And for those of us who've seen, like I did a few times as a child, the old period piece Ben-Hur, which is about a much later period, but which showed that period's use of the same techniques. Ben-Hur shows
they weren't good
battle.
at inventing new types of ships.
Yeah,
at that point.
It took them a while, at least in the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
I mean, the Romans, people really like fucking idolized the Romans for some reason, but they were not really that clever. They were just good at stealing shit.
They invented putting lead in your food.
Oh, yes. That was a critical innovation.
They also invented pedophilia. Pretty sure. Maybe that was the Greeks.
They kind of capitalized on pedophilia. Yeah, they turned it into something that people could really be proud of.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and then they also invented scraping the flesh off of people with tiles to murder them. Which that was some great shit. Yeah, look up Hypatia if you ever get a chance.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of Roman shit going on. That was a much later era, but the Phoenicians were involved at the beginning of it. Anyway, so the trick with using these triremes or biremes to ram other ships is that if you do screw up your maneuvers, then you're the motherfucker who gets rammed and sunk. I mean, it was just dog eat dog when you're in these sea battles at the time.
It's like a joust but cooler.
Yeah, exactly. The way I like to think about it is like these trireme sea battles, these ramming sea battles, kind of require the grace and power of a figure skater, but you're limited by the physique of a giant wooden tub with tiny little centipede legs. Like, you need to be as good as a figure skater, but you're like a fucking slob.
I kind of want to see now a shot-for-shot remake of A Knight's Tale, but with triremes.
With triremes. Yeah.
That'd be cool.
That would be hilarious.
Yeah, so the next thing in our notes here is Phoenicia is known as a thalassocracy, a state that existed primarily in the maritime realm. The most well-known thalassocracy is the British Empire.
Yeah, that's a note out of place.
Yeah, we did really good.
That. Yeah,
really good on the notes this time.
Yeah. Oh, the writing system.
Oh yeah, they invented the alphabet, which is pretty cool. Our alphabet is more or less derived from theirs.
Yep.
Indirectly through the Greek and then Roman alphabet. So that, I mean, it's not something that would be easy to study, but basically that was a form of standardization that was really important for statecraft because, I mean, it's a whole other topic, but writing systems are really a state invention.
Oh, yeah.
Non-state societies really did not use writing systems at all. State systems did because it let them keep records and send communications from far away and stuff like that. And another important thing is that the lower classes who were illiterate could not understand the magic symbols that the ruling class were using to give directives and stuff. So the Phoenician alphabet was adopted from Egyptian hieroglyphics, according to what we believe anyway. There's no way to know that for sure.
Seems to be.
Yeah, but by all appearances, it was adapted from Egyptian hieroglyphics. So they created 22 letters for their alphabet, and they didn't have vowels. I don't think.
Yeah,
I don't know if they didn't have vowels or they just didn't write them.
Yeah, as
usually.
I understand it, and listeners, correct us if we're wrong, as always.
Peter, correct us if we're wrong.
Peter, please, we beg you. Ryan has taken on a terrible failure of a co-host.
He's not even in Bahrain, so you know what's the point,
right? What the fuck is the point? I don't have any of the Bahraini connections, and I don't even have a South African accent. I'm super boring. I'm a baritone. Nobody likes that shit. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
You're just gonna have to talk with a South African accent from now on. Do you want me to teach you how to do it?
You just get real nasal and flip your vowels on their sides.
So instead of saying like, hey, how are you doing? You say, oi, governor, how's it going? Can I throw some shrimp on the barbie?
I hate it when you say that shit.
I'm walking here. Hey, I'm walking here. That's good. That was almost perfect.
Yeah. Every vowel is now an E.
I think if you just make your voice a little bit higher, you'll get it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Peter.
We know that living in Bahrain has reformed you, and we appreciate that. But yeah, so the Semitic languages, at least in the past, it seems, because of the way that their structure worked, you could omit the vowels because you would know from the writing, if you were a native speaker, where the vowels were.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Because it was contextual to how the language works.
Right.
And so there was like, well, it's pointless to fucking put the vowels in. You just put the consonants in.
Yeah, like we could
know
most of the vowels from our words and we would know what it is. Yeah, exactly. That makes sense.
So, so that's a linguistics thing, and I might be slightly wrong on that, but that's my general impression based on what I've read.
So vowels, I think, pretty good invention. Personally.
Vowels are fun, honestly. I mean, how do you fucking get Italian without vowels, Yeah. It's a me.
I'm pretty good at Italian, personally.
I'm writing vowels here. We're going to wear that joke out so hard. So
I don't think it'll ever die.
No, it'll never die. Just like, it'll never be racist to make fun of Italians.
So we already mentioned the 3 institutions, I think, right?
We talked about there was the royals, the temples, the council of elders, and of course the merchants as classes.
Right. So unlike in Japan, which we covered in Sengoku, Japan, merchants were probably pretty high class because that is what the state depended on for its survival.
Staple of society.
Right.
Because they had farmers, but they didn't give a fuck.
Yeah. I remember what I was going to look for. Keep going though.
Yeah. Well, okay. So we just wanted to cover like a few of the major cities of ancient Phoenician society. Despite the several thousand years since their foundation, they survived through thick and thin, and many of these cities are still standing and inhabited today. Right? They may not be inhabited by people who call themselves Phoenicians, because that's a little anachronistic.
I think there was recently some pundit that got made fun of for calling Lebanon Phoenicia.
Oh,
I think it was one of the
God.
Iraq war architects, actually.
Jesus
one of those
Christ,
fucking
man.
assholes.
Who the fuck are these people? Fucking Christ.
Yeah.
Like, okay. Like, how many warheads do I have to suck to get a job like that? But, yeah, so a lot of these cities are still around, and there's people in them. Many of them are now not Phoenicians, but who gives a fuck? The cities are there.
Yeah,
because
Byblos is still around, right?
Yeah,
Sur is still around.
Yeah, Sur, known as, I guess, Tyre in English. Byblos, like
Tyre is the spelling
we're still
of it.
puzzling over how to actually pronounce that in the original.
Yeah, I'm convinced that it's Sur.
Mm-hmm. British Tyre.
But I tend to pick whatever's the most contrarian argument.
Yeah,
it's the correct one. So I'm going to go with Sur.
Yeah, so Tyre or Sur.
Which is in Lebanon. It's like right on the coast.
Yeah. Also in Lebanon, Sidon, or I think Sidon or Sidonia.
Yeah, I would pronounce it Sidon.
Yeah.
Or Sidonia, like the anime series.
Right.
So
or the
anime
the
tie-in
Muse song before they went
Sidon
stupid.
Sidon is a city that is a giant like stone-looking spaceship that's constantly being attacked by
pretty badass
aliens.
show. I really enjoyed that one. It's like if you like Attack on Titan, and you like space,
it's like Attack on Titan with mildly better pacing.
Yes, that's definitely true. Yes, less gore.
Yeah, I think overall the animation is not nearly as good.
Right. Yeah. It's got that. What do they call that? It's
animation.
like the CGI style.
Cell shaded
anime.
CGI.
Yeah, cell shaded. Yeah, exactly. So it's like it's
the characters
right.
are decent. I would say that I like Attack on Titan better by a long shot, but I wish that Attack on Titan was paced more like Knights of Sidonia.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Because the pacing is really a lot better.
Exactly. But you also have to give credit to Knights of Sidonia for having at least one character who, as I understand it, I could be mistaken, is non-binary. Is that correct? Non-binary?
I don't remember enough about it to know about that. But
it's either non-binary or kind of like fluid gendered or something like that. Anyway, they're both good series.
Yeah,
they're really great, and they also both kind of seem to care about like social structures, which is cool.
Yeah, it's also by the same guy who made Blom, which I really want to cover at some point.
Really, I haven't heard of that one at all.
There's been 2 anime versions of it, but it's a manga, and it's basically about what would happen if gentrification were taken to the most logical possible extreme.
Fuck.
It's really cool.
Well, have you read The Time Machine by H.G. Wells? Because that's a pretty good example.
Yeah. No, this is like gentrification if it were like automated and put into space.
Oh, fuck.
It's awesome. Yeah. Anyway.
So those really old cities, Tyre, Sidon, I'm just going with the fucking cheap pronunciations here, Baalbek or Baalbek, which was later renamed Heliopolis after Alexander the Great rolled in. He conquered a bunch of these cities. I can't remember if I don't think he conquered all of them. And then eventually was renamed, I think it's Alcala, after it was renamed, conquered by some Islamic forces. But we don't have to get into that. It's like much later.
Yeah, that has to be much later.
Byblos. Eventually, you saw Carthage come up. Was Carthage? I think Carthage was a colony of Tyre.
Okay.
I think. And then Carthage also kind of blew up.
So the city-states administered colonies separately.
Yeah,
that's
basically.
Interesting. Okay.
These trading posts, like they would put out these trading posts in critical locations because they wanted the best possible spots, and this is one reason why these cities lasted so long.
Okay.
And they would often, as I read, they would put them on these promontories, basically like
promontory.
These
I think.
Yeah, promontories. They were kind of like these like cliffside locations overlooking the coast and preferably with a river access.
Uh-huh.
So like, I mean,
So they really strategically knew what they were doing.
That's unbeatable. Yeah. You can't fuck with that.
Right.
And so you'd get like sea access, freshwater access. You'd have elevation, and like half your city could not be fucking attacked.
So they would wreck you in civilization.
They would fucking wreck you. Yeah. They would destroy you if they felt like it. But they weren't a militaristic kind of people generally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so most or all of these cities were founded at least as much as possible in these kinds of locations. Mm-hmm. And so when they would put down a trading post to extend their trading chain, their value chain, they would find a place like that and they'd be like, all right, we're putting it right here because this is safe as fuck. We can get the water, the fresh water, and we can get the sea access. And so then these trading posts would sometimes blow up and be like, oh my God, like this is like there's a ton of trade to be done here, or it connects to another node that's really critically important. It would populate out. It would become a city in its own right, and then they'd be like, we're going to formalize you. We're going to turn you into essentially one of us, right? Again, like, parents and kids, the kids grow up, and the kids start making their own rules. And then Carthage was an example of this, a really strong example, obviously, because they actually posed an existential threat to the Roman Republic. But they were like an outpost, as I recall, and then they developed into a city, and they kind of, I'm pretty sure they came from Tyre in terms of their origins, but then Tyre was overrun by like the Greeks, and then Carthage was like filling the power vacuum, right? So then they're like, all right, we got this. Don't worry, everybody, because the value chain had to be fulfilled, right? Everybody had to fulfill their orders. Everybody had to make their money. Everybody had to sell their shit, and so forth. So Carthage kind of just like, all right, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna step up, and then that led to the power that threatened Roman hegemony in the region, and Rome was trying to rise. So they just, they went back, and these guys had a tussle. But Carthage wasn't the only one. There was also Gadis, which is now known as Cadiz in Spain, and that's it's the
Kadys.
It's the old spelling was Gades, and the Spanish spelling is Cadiz.
Oh,
Cadiz.
okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought.
That's what
I thought I knew
because you're probably thinking in Greek or something.
Yeah, I'm probably just a dumbass and was making stuff up.
That's whatever. But I'm pretty sure, based on my sources, that this is the oldest standing city in Western Europe.
Oh wow!
Period.
Okay.
Yeah, because the Phoenicians were like that. Iberia was like the western extent of their trading posts, which is, that's a lot, right? They covered the whole fucking Mediterranean, right?
Yeah.
So, southwestern Iberia, northwestern Africa, all of that shit they had. Another one that you've heard of in modern times is Palermo in Sicily, which they founded as the city of Ziz, which means flower in their language, in like the 700s BC. But it eventually became a possession of Carthage, a fellow Phoenician city-state, and then became part of the Romans after, the Carthage got demolished, and then eventually was part of the Byzantines, and so forth and so on. So a lot of these Phoenician city-states and outposts and stuff would kind of like change hands, depending on their power, right? But they were all really important, which is one reason why people just took them instead of destroying them. Carthage and maybe Tyre, they were destroyed because they were so powerful.
Okay.
That they were considered worth destroying. Right. But
okay.
Yeah. So getting back to, let's see, we talked about Fallow Blue, we talked about exchange, bills of exchange.
I have a bunch of things here from this one paper that's like a bunch of important changes.
Yeah.
That we have some interesting notes on. So
Yeah,
I'll just
now we're getting
these.
into the more like nitty gritty because we've just barely scratched the surface. Guys. Like Phoenicians had a lot going on.
Yeah, despite us not having a whole lot of knowledge of them, relatively.
Yeah,
since they were a 2,000-year civilization, we still do have quite a bit. So this is from. I don't think I have the title or anything of the paper here, so it's from some study.
It's out there.
Just look at the show notes.
It's online.
I'm just going to put the show notes in this show description, so if you're actually interested,
we have a bunch of sources.
Yeah, it's on page like 6 or whatever. So Yeah, this is going over some important developments, so I'll just go point by point.
Mm-hmm.
So in place of bureaucratic and palace-centered diplomatic and trading networks of Bronze Age internationalism, mercantile city-states became the building blocks in a new economic framework. So temples rather than palaces became the symbols of communal consciousness and economic success, and merchant enterprise rather than state-controlled exchange became the dominant mode of trading activity.
Yeah.
So that's we've pretty much talked about that already.
Yeah, we set that up for sure.
And then another one that we've already mentioned, but not really went into too much, the production of iron. So the spread of ironworking inevitably subverted systems based on the acquisition and circulation of bronze. And since control of the system was fundamental to the character of Bronze Age polities, this alteration was an irrevocable step in preventing the reemergence of these kind of centralized economies. So basically, because they controlled the processes and technologies for ironworking, they were able to subvert the rise of states like the old type of states that were based on sort of central planning, more or less.
Exactly.
Using iron technology because all they had access to was bronze.
Yep.
Let's see. I guess I'll skip.
Yeah, the use of iron and production and use of iron in the like late Bronze Age, early Iron Age was, I mean, it was a fucking king killer. Like, as soon as anybody was able to organize the production and distribution of iron, because it was such a highly superior technology.
Yeah, I'm just imagining people like slicing through swords.
Yeah, it was literally how it basically went. Like you would produce these iron weapons, iron shields.
It used to be more like shoving a spear through someone's bronze armor. Would
exactly.
Be the real thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just incredibly superior. I mean, like a warhead versus like a conventional bomb.
Right.
You know?
Gun versus a sword.
Exactly. Head and shoulders.
Right.
And so if you had iron forges, you were about to become a major player.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and the other thing in their trade was Chris has mentioned value chains a couple times, and this isn't the really contemporary economic term, which
it's similar,
value chain
but not
and contemporary
the same.
value chain and contemporary economics is basically other than the immediate production process for something, all of the other roles that go into making it possible. So like in a given company, like the HR department would be considered part of the value chain, even though it's not directly involved in the production process.
Because
but in
it's
this
part
case,
of like assurance or something.
Yeah. But in this case, it's basically a series of steps. It's more like supply chain, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a series of steps in a production process to ultimately produce a usable end product.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
if we look at like material production and trade versus say like valuation, that's kind of where that difference lies, right?
Yeah. So in this case, it's kind of like it's sort of like an assembly line, but distributed over a large, like multiple
over the Mediterranean.
Yeah, multiple
basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Be like your conveyor belt. You know, your assembly line starts in, say, the Levant, where the Murex mollusks live,
right?
And then, you know, just theoretically, right?
Yeah,
hypothetically here, you know, and then ends in like Greece or fucking northern Italy, you know.
Yeah, and so like an assembly line, it allows all of these different groups to produce a product while each of them have no knowledge of how to actually produce it themselves.
Right, exactly.
And they don't have the power of the state. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which leads to a few other developments in their economic structure, in their emphases, kind of like their business concerns, right?
Yeah.
Which we kind of talked about before. There was two things in particular. One is security, and the other is specialization.
Right.
Exactly. Because sorry, caught you again. Sorry, I'm sorry. Because we talked about it. I just
totally
assumed
this.
That's all right. That's all right. That's all right. Because, okay, let's see. So specialization first. Specialization, as you already kind of
right. Yeah.
led up to.
So states. Since there were multiple states existing, they were able to become mutually dependent on one another.
Exactly.
So, as opposed to if you just have one state, you have to produce everything yourself.
Right. Which is
when
very cost intensive, labor intensive,
right.
et cetera.
Yeah. And the effect of it being costly is that you just can't produce as much.
Right.
So when you have multiple states that are mutually independent on one another, you can have states that specialize.
Yep.
So the Phoenician state can specialize in producing purple dye.
Right.
and
Right.
Iron and glass and stuff like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why some of those trading posts were probably able to emerge as city-states proper,
Yeah.
because they weren't necessarily just access points to, say, like a large local labor or trading network. They were also potentially becoming centers of like modules of production along that value or supply chain, where they're like, oh, we refine such and such, or a number of goods,
Yeah.
and then they were able to increase that value, 10 or 100-fold along the chain.
And I'm sure at a certain point they realized, like, oh, we actually have leverage now because you need us for X.
Right. We've monopolized that.
Yeah.
Yep. And then security came in because, as we mentioned, as you develop these trade networks and these supply and value chains, you got to assure, you got to guarantee that they're gonna survive the trip. They're not gonna get pirated, raided by other city-states or other civilizations or whatever. But also that once they get there, that they're not going to just get, absconded with by the people at the destination, So two different concerns there, as well as probably a variety of other sort of smaller concerns. But along the way, security regimes were managed and articulated by those city-states and the local regimes on their own behalf. But you would imagine that, again, it's kind of like this path dependency concept in economics, where things follow on to each other, and like everything that came before somewhat predetermines what comes after. It's very kind of like logical stuff, but it's something that you have to add into your logical framework in order to understand why things happen the way they do. So the security frameworks, the security regimes followed onto the supply chain, value chain regimes, and the emergence of various city-states from trading posts and colonies and so forth. I know I'm talking a lot, but basically, say a Carthage, again, famously an existential threat to Rome due to their maritime economic competition, for various reasons. They had a variety of value adds and let's see what else. I assume they had maybe production centers and stuff like that, but because of that, then they had to have a security regime to protect that from interlopers, and so that led to their entanglement in politics overseas, and that led to their rivalry with the Romans, and that led to the wars with the Romans, which led to them nearly destroying Rome. They could have actually done it fairly easily once Hannibal was in Italy, but there was other strategic considerations, and then that led to Rome destroying Carthage, and that led to the sort of the final analysis of Phoenician civilization as we know it. That was a tangent, but that's a nice little apocalyptic thing.
So there's a bunch of other things here, but since we're starting to run a little bit long, I'm going to skip ahead to just this last one. So I already mentioned that there was no single state currency.
Right.
And one of the things that, when I read that, one of the things I speculated about was they probably, I don't remember why I thought this, because I'm not at 100% right now anymore.
Same, man.
So maybe I'll be able to explain it in the show notes or something like that after I edit. Maybe I'll put it in there. But basically, I suspected they probably had a large slave population.
Yeah.
And so, yes, they did have a large slave population. So increasingly, Phoenicians had chattel slavery, alongside the forms of household slavery, like patriarchal slavery.
Right.
And so slaves became a commodity traded in large numbers and were applied to large-scale construction and industrial works, including agricultural and mining work. Slave populations might then have been ethnically distinctive, often brought from considerable distances, and this matches up with a lot of early statecraft, which used a lot of forced resettlement, where they basically took an entire population from wherever they were living, forced them to move somewhere else, and usually they would raise their city so that they had nowhere to go back to.
Right.
And this would have probably been even easier for them because they have this whole network of city-states that are far apart from each other, so they can just take them from, if they took them near Sur, they could take them to, Sudan or whatever, and they would be so far away that there's nothing they could do, and all they could do is work.
Just work, Yeah. And this was exactly what you said. Like, their network really enabled them to do this shipping, like long-distance shipping of slave populations, from one place to like a completely alien place to those people. And another thing is that the Phoenicians were heavily influenced by the Egyptians, and the Egyptians made a practice.
They fucking loved slaves.
They loved slaves, and they loved doing this thing where they'd like just fucking destroy your shit.
Yeah.
Raise it to the ground, take all the people who were left and just sell them or, acquire them for their own purposes, So the Phoenicians
guy
were
named like CC in power.
Yeah, right, motherfucker. And so the Phoenicians were just like, oh, that works, and we could make a ton of money as well as actually incorporate that into our own apparatus.
Yeah. So I almost wonder if even like, since they didn't have like a state currency, they maybe the city-states traded slaves with one another.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, slaves have always been in a slave society. Slaves are one of the key kind of trading kind.
Right. Yeah. So to wrap it up, the connection with modern political economy. Sorry. So we could compare the Phoenician state of the day to today's state of capital, where today there are distinct nation states, each with their own set of laws, culture, their own money, but in practice they're somewhat like the distinct city-states of Phoenicia in that they are part of a larger de facto superstate that exists out of shared interests and a loose ethnic association. So this is totally speculative on my part, but the Phoenicians were a Semitic ethnic group with a shared origin, much like the Anglo-Saxon ethnic group that currently rules the world.
Yep.
But again, the history of Phoenicia spans 2,000 years across distinct city-states and distinct regions, which is way longer than Americans have been separated from their English motherland. So, like, even if you consider Americans like a distinct ethnic group, you would have to consider like people in Sur distinct from people from Sudan, because they've been apart for so long.
Yeah.
They have to have developed their own individual, like, shared culture.
Exactly. Regionalism is always important, even if they had those shared interests and whatnot. This sort of the tacit cooperation we talked about.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's a similarity of them being based on merchant culture. And
you've got that, like we talked about,
elevating
the
merchants
religion,
to the highest
culture,
class.
pre-ordering your value system.
Right. Yeah.
So that you can maintain it.
Yeah. Because, I guess today we have kind of a hybrid system where we do maintain power a lot through military action.
Yeah.
The U.S. has bases in almost every country on Earth, but the primary thing, the primary part of our system of statecraft is trade.
Yep. Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We're obsessed with it.
Right.
Quote unquote free anything is our fucking lunch.
Yeah.
Do
you have anything else to add?
Not really. Do we have any other fellow podcasts we can plug from this one, or? I can't really think of anything
about this subject. I don't think so.
Well, not on this. I would be surprised if any given podcast went after Phoenician political economy.
Well, I mean, still like ancient political economy is still not really
not well documented generally.
But we do. I added a neighbors section to the website.
Nice.
Which is postscarecitymagazine.com is still up.
Cool.
It still contains all of the episodes prior to season 3. So all the ones with me and Peter are up there.
Nice.
Eventually, I'm going to add a redirect to the new site, which is neighborscience.podbean.com. You don't need the Podbean app to access those episodes. Some people seem to think that you do. You can get it on any podcast app except for Spotify, as Chris's roommate pointed out. I'll try and eventually get things on Spotify. The problem is a lot of our episodes, not a lot, but a few of our episodes have copyrighted music in there, so I have to remove it before I can put it on there. So, yeah, any podcast app except for Spotify currently has our episodes on there. There was an issue where it was only putting out the most recent 20 episodes. Mm-hmm. So someone was trying to find an old one of our Capitalist Power episodes and couldn't find it.
Oh, yeah.
So they thought it was...
Those are the good ones.
Yeah, those are the good ones. Yeah. But that's fixed now, so until we get 100 episodes, we'll be good. And then it'll start limiting them again. So yeah, neighborscience.podbean.com, postscarecitymagazine.com. It still has the zine, still has seasons 1 and 2 of the show. Mm-hmm. We have our Twitter account at NeighborsciPod. And then Instagram and Facebook and Patreon are all Neighbor Science, so you can look for them on there. And is that it? I think that's it.
That's about it. I mean, we can find you at handle?
I'm at Handle of Rye, and Chris is at Solidarity_Goth. Although he's trying to take a Twitter break.
I've been taking a bit of a break. I just need to clear my head. But feel free to follow me or tweet abuse at me. I can take it. I'll be back in probably like a week or two just to kind of say dumb shit all over again.
Yeah.
And embarrass myself.
Yeah. So if you enjoyed that, the next episode we're going to do is companies spying on behalf of the government.
Yes.
And then hopefully that'll give us enough time to do the Dutch East India Company episode. Yeah, which we might maybe we will combine it with the Maersk one, because I don't know if we'll have enough on each, but maybe we will. I don't know.
You know, I would.
I'm more worried about Maersk.
Yeah, I think we'll have to talk about how we want to do the next few episodes on Maritime Empire. Yeah. But so
we're doing a couple of thalassocracy episodes.
Yeah, we want to really kind of get onto that, talk about the political economy of that. Distribution is really important for them, so that's of interest to us.
Yeah.
The episode on companies that spy. Mm-hmm. It's just going to be 3 hours of us running out of breath listing the names of companies, and that's the whole episode. Also, we implore you to buy a lot, endless amounts, in fact, of tin foil, so that you can craft helmets.
Hats. Yeah.
For protective headgear.
Yeah.
But make sure that while you're wearing the protective headgear, you are actually listening to our podcast and none else.
Right.
This is the only safe podcast.
But you can also listen to Goth Angel Sinners or Leftendo.
Yes, those are almost as safe.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm running out of steam.
Yeah, me too. It's way past my bedtime.
Yeah, it's time for me to start drinking again.
All right. Bye.
Bye, guys.